everybody, and welcome back to I Just Want to Talk About the Bible. If this is your first time joining us, then welcome. I'm glad that you're here. My name is Christian Keeter, and I live in the southeast of the United States of America with my amazing, beautiful, godly wife, Lacey, and our two wonderful daughters, Felicity and Serenity. Many of you guys will remember from your childhood, or maybe your adulthood, I guess that's cool too, the little connect the dot pictures. You would sit down with a pen or a pencil, a crayon, colored pencil, marker, something, and you'd connect the dots. There would be dot number 1 to dot number 2 to dot number 3 to dot number 4, and there would be like dozens of these things. And from your perspective at first, it's just a blank piece of paper with a ton of dots on it. But yet, as you connected the dots, the picture began to become clearer and clearer. So you connect dots 1 and 2, and you're like, okay, cool, that's amazing, it's a line. And then you connect dots 2 and 3, and you're like, wow, it's a crooked line now. It's a slightly longer crooked line. And then dots 3 and 4 and so on. But after a while, as you begin to really connect the dots, the picture comes into focus. And you begin to see, oh, this is a raccoon in the woods. Or, oh, this is a dolphin in the ocean. Or whatever the connect the dots picture is. And then it's actually, you kind of feel incredible afterwards. You're like, I'm an artist. Like, I drew this. I drew that raccoon. I drew that dolphin, and it's amazing. And in reality, somebody else is an artist, and we just got to connect the dots. But it still makes us feel great about ourselves. But the point that I want to make today is that this idea of connecting the dots is actually a really helpful image for what it looks like to gain wisdom from the Lord. Now, wisdom is something that we all need, whether we realize it or not, but I would say that the majority of us, if not all of us, see our need for wisdom. We see that we need the Lord's guidance. We see that we need His help in making, just day-to-day decisions. And I'm not even necessarily talking about between right and wrong and good and bad. It's about just various scenarios where it's like, okay, here is X scenario and Y scenario and Z scenario, and all of them kind of have pros and cons, and I don't necessarily know the right thing to do. I need wisdom. Examples could include things like, should I take this job or should I take that job? Which school should I apply to or go to? I mean, there's all sorts of scenarios like that where it's like we just need practical wisdom, from the Lord to show us the right thing to do. It could be something like, oh, we're in the middle of a tense situation and we want to help be a peacemaker in the situation between these two parties that are at odds. How can we most effectively do that? Every area of life, really. I mean, buying a house, is this, we just need the Lord to show us what would be best. And because He sees things that we don't see. And so we desperately need wisdom from Him. And I will say, wisdom is not just a function of, knowing exactly the right thing to do necessarily. I would say it's also a function of having the Lord's perspective on a situation. So I'll go ahead and say, in my life, there are, I actually have a document entitled Wisdom/Perspective. And it's not because I'm so wise and have so much perspective. It's rather just kind of me compiling all of the stuff that the Lord is showing me about this, that I'm learning, writing down scriptures. And part of this document is what the Lord is currently teaching me. And underneath that, also current prayers for wisdom and perspective. And so it has a whole lot of stuff in there. But under current prayers for wisdom and perspective, I have 13 items written here right now. And so there's just a lot of areas where I'm like, okay, I really need the Lord to show me, to kind of pierce through the clutter, because, things get cloudy. Decisions get cloudy when you introduce things like multiple potential options. You introduce things like emotions and just various circumstances and all sorts of stuff. Things can become really cloudy. And so we just need the Lord to pierce through and to make things clear. And, like I said, on this list also is not only guidance things, but also perspective things. So, for example, one of the perspective things I have, and I shared about this a little bit in the last episode, I'm just going to, give you an example just to kind of help ground this and help it make more sense. But I shared in the previous episode that I don't like conflict, tense scenarios. I don't like tense interactions with people, and that's something that at points in my life in the past, that's something I've avoided. And I shared in the previous episode as well that there were just various scenarios that the Lord was leading me into where it's like, no, I can't run away from this. I actually need to go through this. I need to do it right. Like, I need to be to obey the scriptures and to do things with, gentleness and not jump to conclusions and all this sort of stuff. But I need to go into this. And so one of the perspective changes I need would be not so much to be like, Lord, please shield me from any tense situation ever again, and please shield me from all conflict ever. Amen. And it's like, and the reality is that we live in a world where it's just going to come along. It's going to happen. Jesus said, blessed are the peacemakers, right? And why do we need peacemakers? Well, because peace needs to be made. It implies a lack thereof, right? And so it's like, so the scriptures just acknowledge that, there's going to be situations like this in the world, and there's plenty of other scriptures that I could, reference as well. But so this isn't a matter of, Lord, this is a matter of asking for a change in perspective. Lord, help me see this whole thing differently so that it's not something that's so aversive to me. And instead of just trying to shield myself from the discomfort of tense scenarios and conflict and things like that, rather, I can pass through these things in a godly, edifying way where all parties emerge better for it, right? Like, that would actually be better. And so a change in perspective. And so that's just one example. So let's look at some scriptures here about this, about wisdom. I'm going to James chapter 1. And some of you will already know where I'm going because this is one of the foremost passages on wisdom. Let's begin in verse 5, I think. Yeah, verse 5. James 1:5, we'll read verses 5 and 6, say, if any of you lacks wisdom, let him ask God, who gives generously to all without reproach, and it will be given him. But let him ask in faith, with no doubting, for the one who doubts is like a wave of the sea that is driven and tossed by the wind. And I'm actually going to read through the next two verses as well, verses 7 and 8. It goes on to say, for that person must not suppose that he will receive anything from the Lord. He is a double-minded man, unstable in all his ways. Okay, so specifically focusing, let's start at verse 5 here. So it says, if any of you lacks wisdom, which, that's all of us. We all find ourselves in scenarios where we just say, I don't know the right thing to do. I need a different perspective on this scenario, or I need the Lord to guide me as to what I should specifically do in this scenario to show me what course of action is right. And so all of us lack wisdom at various points. It says, if any of you lacks wisdom, let him ask God. Okay, so what do we do if we lack wisdom? We ask God. We ask God. And then it goes on to say, describing God, it says, who gives generously to all without reproach, and it will be given him. So it says if we lack wisdom, let's ask God about it. Let's ask God for it. And then it says that he gives it generously. Generously. He gives it generously. Not stingily. Is that a word? Stingy? But not. It's not like he's withholding it. It's lavish. It's generous. In fact, the word translated as generous, it's haplos. Again, for those who care about the Greek word, haplos, it means simply, openly, frankly, or sincerely. So think about that. God gives wisdom generously, simply, openly, frankly, sincerely. It's not like some sort of game. It's not like, we have to jump through hoops and do this crazy. It's like, no, ask for wisdom, and he simply gives it. He openly gives it. He sincerely gives it. He gives it generously. And so this is something that we need to understand, and we need to really wrap our minds around, because we're going to talk about the part where it says we must ask in faith in a minute. And for us to do that well, we have to really understand verse 5 here, and I'll talk about why that is in just a minute. And actually, before proceeding, I just want to say that a lot of what I'm going to be sharing today is something that that I have learned from a guy who's discipling me. I was meeting with him recently, and as we were talking through some things, and he was explaining some of this to me, the Holy Spirit just, I feel like, took it and just planted it in my heart, and it began to grow and to spread. And you can relate to this, where you hear somebody say something, you hear maybe in a sermon, but something happens where the Holy Spirit just takes it and puts it in your heart, and it just clicks, and it just begins to grow. And so that was my experience. And so a lot of what I'm sharing will be stuff that I heard from him, and just ways that I've been able to apply that. And so I just wanted to say that to give credit where that is due. But returning to the passage, let's return back here to, let's see here, we're James 1:5 down here. So we just talked about the word generously. It's a beautiful, beautiful word, haplos, just what it means, just, simply. But he says, let's see here, let him ask generously, or let him ask of God. And then it says, and God will, sorry, I lost my place there. It says, if any of you lacks wisdom, let him ask God, who gives generously to all without reproach. Reproach. And so it says he does it without reproach. And to reproach means to, the word can mean reproach. It can mean upbraid, revile, it can just mean this kind of, it carries the idea of, just this negative like criticism. Because again, reproach is not a word that we often use. I mean, in English, the word reproach means to address someone in such a way as to express disapproval or disappointment. The word upbraid means to find fault with someone or to scold them. To revile someone is to criticize in an abusive or angrily insulting manner. And what this passage is saying is that is the opposite of how God responds to our request for wisdom. It says without reproach. He is not going to insult us for needing wisdom. He's not going to criticize us. He's not going to heap insults upon us. He's not going to disapprove of us. I mean, he gives it generously. In fact, let me read you that same verse from the New Living Translation. I've been reading in the English Standard Version. The NLT has James 1:5 as, if you need wisdom, ask our generous God, and he will give it to you. He will not rebuke you for asking. Isn't that beautiful? And so here in this one verse, we have, if any of you lacks wisdom, which both my hands are raised in the air right now. Please, Lord, I lack wisdom. Help me. Give me wisdom, Lord. And it says, if any of you lacks wisdom, let him ask God, who gives generously to all without reproach, and it will be given him. And so there's a couple more things I want to highlight from this passage. Notice how it says, who gives generously to all without reproach. It doesn't say to some. It doesn't, there's not this whole, well, God will give some people wisdom, but he probably won't give me wisdom. No, it says he gives to all without reproach. He gives generously to all without reproach. And so this applies to you. This applies to me. And then look at the end of the verse, and it says, and it will be given him. It doesn't say it might. It doesn't say it could. It says it will be given him. This is so important for us to understand, because if we don't really wrap our mind around the truths in verse 5, then we're going to do the very thing that verse 6 tells us not to do, which is to doubt. So going down to verse 6, it continues and says, but let him ask in faith with no doubting. For the one who doubts is like a wave of the sea that is driven and tossed by the wind. And so we know that it's kind of a frequent thing in the scriptures. Jesus would be, somebody would come to Jesus and he would say things like, let it be done to you according to your faith. And so here we need to, the text explicitly says we need to ask this in faith. We need to pray this prayer believing that God will answer it. In fact, let me pull up Hebrews 11 right here. Hebrews 11:6, famous passage on faith. It says, and without faith, it is impossible to please him. For whoever would draw near to God must believe that he exists and that he rewards those who seek him. He rewards those who seek him. And so, returning back to James 1 here, we have to ask in faith. In other words, when we need wisdom, we need to ask God to give us wisdom and then believe that he will do it. And that's not putting words in God's mouth. That's not trying to force God to do something. On the contrary, it's just believing that he will do what he's already said. Because what does verse 5 say? It says if we ask, he will give it. It's not limited to only specific people. And not only will he give it, he'll give it generously. And not only will he give it generously, he'll do it without insulting us, without heaping disapproval on us, without any of that. It's clear that the Lord wants to give us wisdom. We just need to ask. And so, I referenced my mentor earlier, and one with regard to verse 6, he says, he asked, well, how do you get the doubt out? He says, well, because the verse says, well, let him ask in faith with no doubting. How do you get the doubt out? And so he and I were talking, and we talked about things like Romans 10:17, which says, so faith comes from hearing, and hearing through the word of Christ. And so I would just encourage you, the best way to get the doubt out is to, I would suggest, I'm not going to say this is the best way, but I mean, this is just kind of where I am and what I've learned. In this scenario, for example, memorize, meditate on verse 5. Verse 5 of this, which is the one about, lacking wisdom, the one we've just spent a couple minutes talking about. In fact, that same man gave me a list of potential things we can do to help us to practically really meditate on the scriptures. And so some of the ideas are to memorize the passage, to do word studies, to look up cross-references, to journal any additional thoughts or notes, and then to consider how what the Lord is showing us through the passage connects with our lives. And this is going to be where this whole passage connects with what I was talking about at the beginning, which is the dots connecting. So we ask God for wisdom. Now, a couple of things I'll say. It does say that God will give us wisdom. It doesn't say when or how God will give us wisdom, but it says He will give us wisdom. And so as we ask, we need to go around expecting Him to answer that prayer because He said He would in His Word, and keep our eyes open. Look around. Look for things that are relevant to this. And so it could be via a circumstance. It could be through a scripture. It could be just through something that you feel like God speaks directly to your heart. It could be through another person. It could be through a podcast, a sermon, or whatever. But as you are, praying through, asking God for wisdom in a specific area, which, by the way, it's good to pray specific prayers. I've heard it said, if you want specific answers, then pray specific prayers. But, as we're doing this, it's important to take notes, to take note of whenever there are things that happen that are relevant to that, to connect the dots. And so this is what this could look like. And this is actually what I'm doing. I have a folder on my, under my notes. It's called Current Lessons from the Lord. And then underneath that, I have various different topics, various different areas where I feel like the Lord is doing things in my life and teaching me things, expanding my perspective, challenging me, developing me, and so forth. And so I've already, referenced like the whole thing with conflict and how the Lord is developing in that. And so I have one. It's called Conflict/Difficult Conversations. And underneath there, I have kind of a consolidated part of, what the Lord has been teaching me, but then I have a section called how dots are connecting. And I have multiple dots here, and by dots I mean bullet points, of things that are relevant to this, things that have happened that fall under this category, things that, situations I found myself in where I've kind of had to lean into scenarios, or things that I've learned from people that help me to progress through such situations. So I'm just using the example of difficult conversations just to, put some flesh on this thing. And so, remember, one of the areas that I need wisdom and perspective is to have the right perspective on conflict and difficult circumstances or difficult conversations. And the Lord is answering that little by little. And so imagine that with sticking with the whole connect the dots thing, envision that each one of these, bullet points is just connecting a couple of dots, where it's like the more of these things that I note that happen, more of these things that the Lord brings into my life, whether it be through other people, through circumstances, through prayer, through His Word, whatever it may be, the clearer the picture becomes and the more wisdom He gives. Now, Listen, I would love to just say, Lord, please give me wisdom, and then boom, there's wisdom, just kind of like Solomon, where he just asked for wisdom. And I do not deny that the Lord can absolutely do that. I mean, he absolutely can, but I'm just saying, let's broaden our idea and expectation of how to gain that wisdom so that we don't actually miss it when it comes. Because I believe there's probably a lot of prayers that the Lord has answered in my life, and a lot of prayers for wisdom and things like that I might not have even noticed because I wasn't looking for it or making note when things happen. And therefore, if we see just one dot or just one, two dots, one line, it doesn't look like it has any intrinsic significance. It just looks like a line. But the more of these things that we connect, the clearer the picture becomes. So if you're asking God for wisdom, if you need his guidance, what I'm talking about right now, where you're like noting these things, is an act of faith. Remember, it says, but let him ask in faith. This is an act of faith. It's like, I'm going to write these things down because I believe, I'm going to have a journal of some kind because I believe God is going to answer this prayer. I believe he's going to show me. I believe he's going to speak to me. I believe he's going to open my eyes. He's going to expand my perspective. He's going to guide me, show me what I need to do. And I care so much about what God has to say that I'm actually going to write it down, and I'm going to revisit it, and I'm going to come back to it, and I'm not going to forget it, and I'm going to write down relevant scriptures. I'm going to think on those, and this is how we do this. This is how we connect the dots. And like I said, my this man that I meet with, he was when he pointed this out, this specifically talking about how dots connect, and it wasn't even like necessarily, I think, the main point of what he was saying, but it just like, I just grabbed onto it, and it just clicked. It just made sense, and I was like, yes. And so I just put in the time and really tried to organize some things in a way where I could keep track of dots that are connecting. And so, James 1, let's stay here a little while longer because there's more in this passage to talk about here. Let me back up verses 2 through 4 in chapter 1. We started reading in verse 5, but let's back up to 2 through 4 because I want to highlight something here. So verses 2 through 4 says, "Count it all joy, my brothers, when you meet trials of various kinds, for you know that the testing of your faith produces steadfastness. And let steadfastness have its full effect, that you may be perfect and complete, lacking in nothing." That's the end of the passage. And so, I don't know about your experience, but in my experience, verses 2 through 4 and then verse 5 have been a lot of times, not all the time, I've seen times where people have kind of connected them. But for me, at least personally, I've generally, for the most part, viewed these things as separate matters. Where it's like, okay, verses 2 through 4, they're about, trials and being developed. And then verse 5 is about wisdom. However, like we've already seen, sometimes what wisdom is having the right perspective. It's not necessarily a change in circumstances. It's not necessarily, and I'm not suggesting that we not pray for a change in circumstances. The Bible, Jesus says in Matthew 7, and I'm going to come back to James here, but he said in Matthew 7, verses 7 through 11, he said, "Ask, and it will be given to you. Seek, and you will find. Knock, and it will be open to you. For everyone who asks receives, and the one who seeks finds, and to the one who knocks it will be opened. Or which one of you, if his son asks him for bread, will give him a stone? Or if he asks for a fish, will give him a serpent? If you then, who are evil, know how to give good gifts to your children, how much more will your Father who is in heaven give good things to those who ask him?" And that's the end of the verse. And so I would say, yes, absolutely. There is nothing wrong with praying for a change in circumstances. But I'm just saying that as we pray through a lot of things, because again, James 1, 2 through 4 is about trials, we need to also just say, Lord, please expand my perspective. Help me to see this whole situation rightly. You could even pray things like, Lord, what are you doing in this situation? Help me to see why things are unfolding the way they're unfolding. Help me just to see things from your perspective. And so, James, and I've talked about James 1, 2 through 4 in other episodes of this podcast, so I'm not going to reteach all of that. In fact, even one of the more recent episodes was largely about that passage, so you can go back and listen to that. It was called The Refiner's Furnace, I believe. And but this whole thing, but then right after that, it flows right into if any of you likes wisdom. And so, in fact, let me read you something here and that I wrote down. So recently, because I've been spending a lot of time on these documents, trying to connect dots and stuff. And, while thinking about James 1, 2 through 4, the passage we just read, in connection with, all this stuff, one thing that I feel like the Lord showed me was this. This is what I wrote down. Transformation doesn't happen overnight. Even if progress seems slow, Even if nothing seems to be happening, the Lord is at work. He is doing something. I must just let steadfastness have its full effect. I must not try to circumvent the process. And that's the end of what I wrote there. And so again, I'm not suggesting that we not pray for circumstances to change. We absolutely should. The Bible encourages us in many places to pray for circumstances to change like that. Jesus even, ask, it will be given to you. Later in James, he says, you have not because you ask not. That's James 4. Let's see here. Yeah, he says, I'll read all of it just for the sake of context. He says, this is James 4, 2-3. He says, you desire and do not have, so you murder. You covet and cannot obtain, so you fight and quarrel. You do not have because you do not ask. But then he says, you ask and do not receive because you ask wrongly to spend it on your passions. And so, listen, the reason they ask and don't receive is because they ask with the wrong motive. But previously he says, you have not, or you do not have because you do not ask. And so there is in there the implication of, hey, we should, their prayer for a changed circumstances it's fine. However, there's more than just that. The Lord will use trials and situations to develop us. The scriptures are replete with examples of that sort of thing, I would say. And this passage in James 1 is just one of those examples. So, returning to James 1, so we see it's like, okay, he will give wisdom. We need to be diligent to look for the answer, to connect the dots. And praying for wisdom can also be praying for not just what to do in a scenario, but also to have God's perspective on the scenario, to ask him what he's doing. But when he shows us these things, we need to be diligent to not forget them. Later in the same passage in James, down in verse 22, he says, but be doers of the word and not hearers only, deceiving yourselves. And that was James 1:22. And so, we need to be diligent to, whenever God shows us something, whenever he speaks to us, let's put ourselves in a position to really hear well by noting it, by writing it down, by returning to it. And so, because, listen, it's kind of, if we're asking God to show us something, but then he shows it to us and we don't even write it down and we forget about it, how helpful was that? And so, no, but I think that if we put ourselves in a position and we walk in faith and show that faith by saying, I'm going to note this down. I am expecting the Lord to speak, and I'm going to write down when he does, and I'm going to act on that. I'm going to obey. I'm going to follow his leading. I think that that's a much, much better thing to do, because, guys, I think that there's, again, like I said earlier, I think there's probably things that I've missed. I know there's things that I've missed, and there's always going to be things that that the Lord will do, and that we won't always catch 100%. We won't always see perfectly what he's doing in our lives. We won't always make the wisest decisions. We won't always glean the wisdom that he offers so freely and generously. But guys, I don't want to miss those opportunities. Although we sometimes will, I want to miss as few of those as I can. I want to have ears to hear. I want to be able to just ask the Lord for wisdom and believe that he will give it and then walk in it. And so I hope that just this passage, looking at James 1, 5 through 8 here, and specifically verses 5 and 6, have really just shown you, it's like, okay, the Lord wants to do this. He's willing to do it. Remember with Solomon, when he asked for wisdom, it pleased the Lord that he asked for wisdom. In fact, let me go to 1 Kings 5. I'm sorry, 1 Kings 3. It's 1 Kings 3 where he asked for wisdom. And so, looking just here at 1 Kings 3:9, this is the end of what Solomon, let me back up, says, let's see, verse 5, at Gibeon, the Lord appeared to Solomon in a dream by night, and God said, ask what I shall give you. I'll just read through this whole passage, actually. So this is going to be 1 Kings 3, 5 through 10. And Solomon said, this is resuming in verse 6, and Solomon said, you have shown great and steadfast love to your servant David, my father, because he walked before you in faithfulness, in righteousness, and in uprightness of heart toward you. And you have kept for him this great and steadfast love, and have given him a son to sit on his throne this day. And now, O Lord my God, you have made your servant king in place of David my father, although I am but a little child. I do not know how to go out or come in. And your servant is in the midst of your people whom you have chosen, a great people, too many to be numbered or counted for multitude. Give your servant therefore an understanding mind to govern your people, that I may discern between good and evil. For who is able to govern this your great people? So that was through verse 9. But then listen to verse 10. It says, it pleased the Lord that Solomon had asked this. And then it goes on, and the Lord responds and says more stuff to Solomon. But I just want to highlight that one detail. Solomon asked for discernment, for wisdom to be able to fulfill the task that God had given him, to be able to lead the people. But when Solomon asked for this discernment, an understanding mind, it says it pleased the Lord that Solomon had asked this. Now, I will say Solomon was very, very wise, but sometimes I don't know how humble Solomon was. And so because we know that Solomon's life is in many ways a tragedy. By the end of it, he started out really strong, but little by little throughout his life, there's these red flags start popping up, and then some pretty major things happen. And so it seems that there was a lot of wisdom, but not a lot of humility, or submission or surrender to the Lord. But that's a different podcast episode for a completely different time. My point is simply to highlight the fact that, look, it pleased the Lord that Solomon had asked this. I believe it pleases the Lord when we ask for wisdom. Why else would he so openly, simply, freely, frankly, generously give us this wisdom? I mean, it sounds like it's a prayer. Listen, the way that James 1:5 is written is it's a prayer that God's like ready to answer. And I don't want to put words in the Lord's mouth, but it's almost like he's up there saying, just ask me for wisdom. Just ask me for wisdom. I am ready to give you wisdom. Ask me for guidance. Ask me for my perspective. Ask me for my help in this scenario. Like, ask me to help you to see. And so I just want to encourage you with this. We all need wisdom. We all need it different ways and different times and different scenarios. And I can't say exactly how it will come, but I will say, based on the scriptures, if you ask in faith, it will come. If you pray in faith, the Lord will give it to you. And if you're having trouble praying in faith, then spend some time meditating on verse 5 of James 1, just really thinking through it. Spend some time meditating on Matthew 7 through 11, which we read earlier. Spend some time meditating on Hebrews 11:6, which we read earlier. All the while asking the Lord, God, I believe, help my unbelief. Increase my faith, Lord, help me. Listen, these are all praying things that are consistent with His will. And so you can pray those sorts of prayers with a lot of confidence. And so I want to end by reading somewhat of a lengthy passage out of Proverbs 2, but this is all about wisdom. And I'm just going to read it. It's going to speak for itself. And so this is how we're going to close. Proverbs 2, verses 1 through 15. My son, if you receive my words and treasure up my commandments with you, making your ear attentive to wisdom and inclining your heart to understanding, yes, if you call out for insight and raise your voice for understanding, if you seek it like silver and search for it as for hidden treasures, then you will understand the fear of the Lord and find the knowledge of God. For the Lord gives wisdom. From his mouth come knowledge and understanding. He stores up sound wisdom for the upright. He is a shield to those who walk in integrity, guarding the paths of justice and watching over the way of his saints. Then you will understand righteousness and justice and equity, every good path. For wisdom will come into your heart, and knowledge will be pleasant to your soul. Discretion will watch over you, understanding will guard you, delivering you from the way of evil, from men of perverted speech, who forsake the paths of uprightness to walk in the ways of darkness, who rejoice in doing evil and delight in the perverseness of evil, men whose paths are crooked and who are devious in their ways. That's a beautiful passage of Scripture. These are the things we need to be thinking on as we ask for wisdom. It says there, I could just reread that entire passage, but ask for wisdom. Believe he will speak to you. Believe he will guide you. And one thing I will say in closing, the opposite of asking for wisdom from the Lord is to decide what's right or wrong in our own eyes. That's a very dangerous place. Sometimes we make right decisions, sometimes we make wrong decisions, and even sometimes when we're trying to make right decisions, we make wrong decisions. Whenever we're doing things in our own wisdom, we need God's wisdom. We need to let him decide for him to show us what's best, to decide which course of action is the best. We need for him to give us his wisdom, his perspective, his insight. And we need to be careful not to decide what is right or wrong in our own eyes, even with good intentions. We always need to be humble, always need to seek the Lord and ask for his help. Well, guys, as always, I hope that this was encouraging. I hope that it was practical for you. I hope that it was motivating. I know when I was first learning this stuff, it's very encouraging to me, and I'm going to continue to work through a lot of this myself. But it's a bit of a paradigm shifter as far as intentionally looking for wisdom. And so I hope that you guys have a great rest of your week, and we will be back next time. All right, God bless you.